Welcome to Transplants, a podcast featuring conversations with women thriving in new roots abroad. I'm your host, Laura Perucci, a Brazilian journalist calling NYC home for over a decade. Each episode, we unpack the transitions, culture shocks, setbacks, and joys of starting a new life in another country, so you can learn from their insights and make your own bold move. Because I truly believe real stories are the strongest way to spark real growth. Hi, and welcome back. On today's episode, my guest is Fernanda Santos. She's a Brazilian author and journalist, and she was the first Brazilian journalist to become a staff writer at the New York Times. But this conversation is not only about career milestones. I first learned about her story years ago when I listened to another podcast, and her story just stayed with me. When I decided to launch Transplants, I knew that I wanted her on the show. So she came to the US to study, invest in her career, and move back to Brazil. But we know that's not what happened. She found love. She said yes to a marriage that reshaped her life. She had a daughter. She built a life here. And then life took another turn. Fernanda lost her husband, and then she had to start all over again, now as a widow, raising a daughter in another country. In this episode, we talked about grief, motherhood, reinvention, journalism, confidence, and finding love again. So let's hear Fernanda's transplant story. Hi, Fernanda. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. It's weird to speak English with somebody from Brazil, but we're going to try this.
Yes. I'm sure we're going to make it. I want to start by going back to your life in Brazil. I would like you to tell us where you're from and what was life growing up back in Brazil. I know that you studied communications, but it was not exactly journalism at that time. How did you realize that journalism was the path that you wanted to take?
So I am from Salvador, Bahia. It's a city, capital city of a very large state in Brazil on the coast. I come from a family where people have always told stories. You know, my earliest memories include my aunts, my uncles, my mom, my dad, my grandparents, my cousins gathered around and just telling story. We love to gossip and talk about other people's lives. I think it's a Brazilian trait.
Yes.
With the best of intentions most of the time. And, but yeah, you're right. I went to college in Rio. My family moved from Salvador to Rio when I was 11. So I always say that Salvador is really the place where I come from. It's where I go to when I go to Brazil to visit. But Rio is the place that forced me to be independent, autosufficient. When I went to college, I went to study communications. I actually wanted to study sociology and to be a sociologist. And I had this wonderful professor. As a good Brazilian, I only remember his first name, Carlos Henrique, because we never call people by their last names in Brazil. And I told him, look, I don't know if I made the right choice because I do love talking to people, and sociology has a lot of that. I do love traveling and going on the field to see how things are impacting people, and sociology has a lot of that. But I really don't want to write academic papers for the rest of my life. I don't want to be an academic. I don't want to have to do a PhD to be taken seriously. And he said, have you ever thought about being a journalist? And I was like, no. That kind of, I don't know, awoke something in me. And I started doing some stories as a freelancer for a newspaper in Rio, and decided to come to the US to go to graduate school and study journalism. So I went to Boston University back in the day when we still called it print journalism. That was 1998. My grand plan was come to the US, study, do your master's, work for a year with a work permit that the visa gives you, and then go back to Brazil and get a job at this newspaper in Rio that my parents always read and that I really wanted to work for. But that's not what
We
happened.
know that. Yes, yes. So you actually it came to the U.S. to do this like master's degree in journalism. Why you decided to like come to the U.S. to do that and not doing like in Rio? Because you could do that in Rio as well. So where that came from?
I am a very competitive person. I'm also the oldest child, the oldest of three children that my parents have. My father grew up poor. He really didn't have a lot of means. He had always dreamed of studying in the United States, but was never able to do that because he had to start working very young. And then, he got married, had children, just had life, took precedence over dreams, something that then became my goal. I basically came to this country. People say, realize your American dream. I actually came to realize my father's dreams in some way. But also a part of it too was that I kind of wanted to get away. I wanted to go someplace different and try something new. And so what better excuse than to say that I'm leaving Brazil because I'm going to study and get a master's degree in the United States. So I had all the support from my parents and that made everything easier.
So you could do both, like having a little adventure while you're pursuing the dream of being a journalist. Besides the influence from your dad that he wanted to study abroad in the United States, what did you know about moving here before you moved to the States? And what were your first impressions when you arrived, like expectations versus reality? And especially like 20-something years ago, I guess things were very different.
Yes and no. What I knew was very little. I had never lived on my own. In Brazil, it's very common that you live with your family, with your parents. Was very pampered in a very common Brazilian way. I had somebody who cooked for me. I made my bed and organized my closets, but I never had to clean a toilet in my house, in my life. I had never had to do it until I came to this country. Honestly, because somebody cooked for me, I never even took any interest in learning how to cook. So I remember vividly going to the supermarket for the first time. I rented an apartment on a 4th floor walk-up building in Boston. I went to Boston University. It was very near campus. And I went to the supermarket with that reference of my mom going to the supermarket to feed 3 kids, my dad, me. We had a live-in maid, which is not a statement of great luxury in Brazil because it's very common. And the maid had her daughter who also lived with us. So my mom shopped for all of us. And so I'm around the supermarket just dumping all these things in my cart, and I get to the frozen aisle and I see all these different foods, chicken tandoori, Cuban bowl, burritos. So I'm just like loading up. It's like, who needs to cook? Everything is ready. And within a month, I realized, number one, everything tastes the same. Number two, I was getting so bloated from so much sodium in the food I was consuming. And number three, I was like, you know what? I am studying for a master's degree. I should be able to learn how to cook. So I guess that kind of encompasses sort of like my logistical challenges that I faced. And then there was the other element of it, which was, coming from Brazil as a middle class to upper middle class person. Always every money I made, I saved to go somewhere. I had been to Europe, backpacking on my own. I speak 4 languages. I was, very well educated, had been to museums. And I came here and I realized that because my name is Fernanda Santos, because I come from Latin America, there was already a very clear understanding of who I was supposed to be. And it took me a long time to conciliate, to first understand the dynamic and then assert myself as actually who I am and not what the labels tell I should be.
Actually, in some of your interview, you mentioned how you discover your identity as a Latina. Because I guess when we live in Brazil, we have no idea about this concept. And I think a lot of Brazilians don't consider themselves Latinos. How was that discovered for you? And what did you learn about being a Latina in the U.S.?
That's a great question. I think if you ask someone from Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, they also will say they don't identify as Latinos because this is a made
Okay.
up term. It's a
Yeah.
term that was made up in the United States. This is a country that loves to put people in categories. Every form you fill out, there's a check a box to say, are you white, black? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm Portuguese, indigenous, and black, African, African descent. So like, what am I? I'm always a little bit of everything, or I'm other. But there is a sort of a strength in numbers kind of mindset that I think gets a lot of us Latinos or people who come from Latin America to associate with one another or to unite, because we understand that it's easier to advocate for yourself when you have others like you. Specifically in the world of journalism, it's not very common to this day for a newsroom to be overwhelmingly, Latino, to use the term that we're talking about. Latino is a regional distinction. It's not a race. It's not even an ethnicity. It just denotes the place of the world, the part of the world you come from, right? So to me, it was in large part that there was I associated myself. I became a member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists pretty early, and Hispanic is not even a term that applies to Brazilians because we were colonized by Portugal. But I was like, hey, if that's the only option for me, I'm going to be one of you, and I will talk about it and educate you about the fact that this is an exclusive term, not an inclusive term. So, it was a gradual process, but one that essentially came from this idea of, discovering who I am and and my place in this country had to include understanding the place that others had for me, the Latino space, and also what this space actually meant for the people inside of it. So I had to meet all these other Latinos to understand, we have things in common, but also we are different.
As you already mentioned, your plan was to come here, study, and eventually return to Brazil to work to a newspaper. And we know that didn't happen. What changed?
I went to a job fair when I was at Boston University. I started the school year here starts, in September. In February, there was a job fair by the American Society of Newspaper Editors. And knowing that I had a work permit for 1 year, I said, I'm going to go to this job fair. And at this job fair, two things happened. I got offered an internship, which then became a job at a newspaper in Western Massachusetts. And I was interviewed for an unpaid internship, which was the biggest affront. Was like my introduction to life in this country and the privilege of journalism, where so many people can afford to work for free, which was something I could not do. But anyway, I was offered that internship by the man I would marry. I met Mike at a job interview. We talked for a long time. It was clear that he was very interested in me, and he asked some great questions about Brazil and about what it was like to grow up in Brazil, which were different than the average questions I got from people. I gave him my resume, which of course had my phone number. He gave me his card. And I remember leaving feeling like, wow, I really wish I could see this person again. I wish that we hadn't met in this context, because it's so weird to feel attracted to someone who just interviewed me for a job. But it turns out that it was mutual. And he reached out to me a couple of days later asking if I was still interested in the internship, which he knew I wasn't, because I was very clear about it. I don't work for free. Nobody should work for free, because that's not work. That's a form of slavery in some way. But we started talking, and one thing led to another. All of a sudden we're dating. All of a sudden I moved in because my job, the place where I was going to be an intern was 20 minutes from his home. Next thing I knew, he proposed and I said yes, and I didn't even hesitate. And and we got married within a year and a half of meeting each other.
Yeah, that was really intense. And and I wanna talk about your relationship. That's actually my next question. That you didn't fully think about the weight of marrying an American and what it would mean quote to leave your country? Because again, the idea was going back. So I guess you're not feeling like I left Brazil. I'm just here for a year and I'll be back. My question is, do you think that one decision helped the other? Like feeling that you were in the right professional path help you to say yes without even thinking to the
No.
marriage, or no? No?
I said yes to the proposal because I was absolutely in love with Mike. I didn't even think about my career. I worked in a small newspaper in Western Massachusetts. I grew up in a big city. Rio de Janeiro was a big, exciting, fun city. All of a sudden, I'm covering Wilbraham and Hamden, two small towns in Western Mass, on the edge of Western Massachusetts, at a newspaper that was paying me very little. I couldn't see a path exactly, mostly because I hadn't really given much thought to it, because my mindset was, this is a year-long thing, and at the end of this year, you're going back, and then this proposal happens in the middle. I say yes, and all of a sudden, my mind changes to like, wow, I'm marrying this guy. And I never for a single moment thought about what it meant, what it would mean to marry somebody in another country, and it's a huge price to pay, and I don't say that in a negative way, like, oh, I regret. No, it was the best decision I ever made, but one of the best. But I never thought about starting all over again. I brought 2 suitcases with me. I never even went back home to get my CDs. At the time we listened to CDs, or my books. Everything kind of stayed behind. I literally was like, I am starting this new life here, this new person, this new country, this new everything. And in some ways, it was an opportunity to leave behind the things that I felt I didn't want to bring with me, And on the other hand, again, this idea of adventure, I've always been into adventures. Never really being someone who thinks too many times before making a crazy decision.
Okay.
And so it just, to me, was an adventure, and one that was for the best of reasons, which was for love. But yeah, my career also benefited from it, because Mike was a journalist. He was an editor. He was incredibly generous with his time and patient to help me improve my writing. He always said, you are an excellent reporter, and you can be an excellent writer as long as you write as yourself. Don't try to write like other people. And I didn't understand that until many, many years later. It just meant to use the words that I had. I didn't have to worry that my vocabulary may not have been as sophisticated as that of many people who are born and raised in this country.
That's so interesting that you're saying that, because there's something that happens to a lot of immigrants, and I would say especially Latin Americans and perhaps women, when it comes to career, confidence, self-worth. A lot of us feel we're not, quote, good enough to succeed in certain industries. And I'm also from like journalism, from communications, and I don't know, there's some extra layer of imposter syndrome, like the feeling of not being good enough to write or speak. You had an incredible career trajectory in journalism. You've contributed to major publications. You wrote a book. I know you're writing another one. You worked for the New York Times. And there's some tea to spill about that. You've worked as a professor, teaching writing. And now you're managing editor at the 19 News. I mean, that's incredible.
I also co-wrote a musical that was off Broadway. So, if we're going to brag, let's do it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I forgot about that, but I read about that. I completely forgot. So, have you ever doubted yourself? And if so, can you tell us more about it? And I guess, how do you trust your own voice in a profession where you need to master this art of writing and speaking? And I mean, I love the advice that he gave you about using your own voice. That's amazing, and that's true. But sometimes we don't remember that.
Yeah, we're so worried about pleasing others and being like others. And I think that that's where it all started, was when I realized that I was not, I worked at the Times, as you said. I started there, and I remember my first desk was between Dan Barry and Anthony De Palma, two writers who I deeply, deeply respected. I was so starstruck by them. Interestingly, two white men, and I really wanted to impress them. I wanted to impress the people who worked at the Times. I wanted to impress the readers in my head, those people who I thought read the Times every day, those sophisticated, rich people in the Upper West Side of Manhattan or something, and who vacation in the Hamptons, like the fancy places, right? And the more I try to do that, the harder it was for me both to get my stories going, and secondly, to actually say what I needed to say. If I was so worried about the words I was going to use, something had to give, and it was usually the story itself. I've had the benefit over time to have people who really saw things in me that I didn't see myself. I still doubt myself. I doubt myself all the time. The job that I have is a big, important job. I have to make a lot of decisions, and sometimes I'm like, we should, maybe we might. I don't say we should because that's not good, but like we could do that. Maybe we might want to do that. All these conditionals, when I actually know what we need to do, and it's simpler if I just say that. With my writing, really was accepting writing as I talk. And that's what when I was teaching, that's what I used to tell my students all the time. Write as you talk, because it will be most authentic. It will come more easily to you. And you will feel then, after you get that first draft out, you can go back and you can improve the sentence. You can play with the length of sentences. You can play with the repetition of words. And it doesn't have to be fancy words. There's so much you can do with language that is not about words. Sentence construction, the mechanics of language is so rich and full of options for a writer. And we get sometimes so stuck on the language. And I think for those of us whose first language is not English, it's hard because many times we have an accent. People can tell that we're not from here. So they already assume certain things about us. And if we have an accent, they assume that an accent means your English is not as good, which one thing has nothing to do with the other. We start then feeling smaller because we notice that people don't take us as seriously as they might take somebody else. And then there is the cultural part, right? Because this is a country that in many ways, a huge country that's so global, but at the same time, so closed in. Like Americans are so kind of focused, like we say in Brazil, they're always looking at their own belly buttons, right? It's like the world that this country is so limited and limiting for them because of the great power that everybody thinks the United States still is. I felt that the lack of American, like typical North American US culture, was a handicap for me, when in fact what I bring into the conversation, what I bring into is this different perspective, this different knowledge, this different way to read things. Even the questions I ask about things everybody knows, sometimes people are like, never thought about that, because they're so used to how things are done, to how they watch things on TV. And that's true, I think, for anyone in any country. But I find that this country in particular, just because of the way a lot of people think that they're in some ways superior, and in some ways, this country is globally, economically, still is. It creates this dynamic that makes those of us who are not from here sometimes feel smaller. It's about talking to yourself. I pump myself up every day. I wake up, I look in the mirror first thing with that face that you got out of bed, still have like crumbs in your eyes, haven't even brushed my teeth, and say, God damn, you're so beautiful. You're so smart. And it sounds so silly, but I have to say, it kind of builds up on you. And at some point you start not believing in it, because it's not about fooling yourself. It's about telling yourself what you really are,
That's a good strategy. I have some Post-its on my computer to remind myself of things that I need to remind about myself. But about the New York Times, can you tell us how you got to the New York Times? Because I guess people will be curious to know about that.
Yeah, I always say that if I had $1 for every time somebody is from Brazil, especially, wrote to me and said, "Hi, I'm a journalist. I really wanted to work at the New York Times," from Brazil, and also like in the US, like lots of young people. there is no formula. And I think that the way that I came in is probably different than the way that most people came into the Times. I met a recruiter at a conference. We kind of stayed in touch. I worked at the Daily News of New York at the time at police headquarters. We had like a room. It's still there, I think, with reporters from different publications who covered the NYPD full time. And I worked for the Daily News covering the police. A reporter from the Times who did that said the recruiter was interested in me, had heard about me. The Times used to have a program for what they called like intermediate reporters. Felt a little offensive to me to be considered intermediate, but if you're opening that door for me and that's my way to get in, I'll take it. I was selected for this program. It was up to 3 years as part of this program before you're considered like it's just a union classification. You go up higher up on the ranks. Went up on the ranks, and I got to cover a lot of different things: education, public education in New York City, the mayor's city hall. I covered the state of New York. And then I went to Arizona as bureau chief in Phoenix to cover the Southwest for the Times.
In one of your recent Substack posts, you wrote that you were the lowest paid national correspondent at the New York Times, and that this realization played a big role in your decision to leave after 12 years. Can you unpack a little bit about that? How did you discover that and what that meant to you?
Well, I was in Arizona. And when I first went to Arizona, it was a different managing editor at the Times. And that editor was a big supporter and fan of mine. And she said, 5 years in Arizona, and then you go from there, maybe Mexico City. And I was super excited about that. Mike was excited about that. We had a daughter already at the time. My daughter was 2 years old. I had been offered something else before over abroad, but it wasn't the right place for my family. And I also made a decision that, I chose my family before the Times, which I heard later that it's not very well regarded, or it wasn't at the time, I guess. I don't know how it is these days. But anyway, I was in Arizona, and I was told by a new editor, the Times wanted me to go back to New York. And I was feeling like, well, I just left 5 years ago. It's a big thing to append your family. But, I talked to Mike, and I said, okay, well, let me explore the options. I reached out to the union president. I want to ask for a raise. Can you help me figure out like how much I can ask without being unreasonable? And through this conversation, I asked, can I ask for this? And he goes, well, maybe you can ask for more. And I said, okay, how about this? And he goes, yeah, I think you can still ask for more. I said, let's take all the national correspondents. Can you tell me, do I make like the lower third, middle third, or higher upper third? And he said, you are the lowest paid of all of them. I talked to an editor who had been a mentor of mine, and just kind of her ambitions kind of took her also in a different direction. The Times is a place so full of egos and ambition. It's a great place, but also a very, very difficult place. I was sad about feeling exploited, feeling underappreciated, feeling used, not by the current editor, but all the editors I had in my 12 years there. Everybody, one way or another, had a chance to correct that, and they never did. And if it was anything that I didn't do right, which is obviously the first thing I thought, nobody also ever articulated that to me. So I would like to think that that's not on me, it's on them. It's really an exploitative relationship that lasted for as long as it did. And Mike said to me, break the chains, leave. Your creativity is going to soar. You're going to shine. You're going to do all these things that you want to do. And that was the summer of 2017. And I said, you know what? I'm going to leave. The Times happened to be offering buyouts around that time. And 12 years there, I got some money. I'm going to start again. I had already the university, Arizona State University, had approached me about teaching there. The school had a dean who was, very supportive of me. And so I just made a complete life change. We decided, let's do this and let's stay in Arizona for a little longer. And and let me see where this takes me. But you probably know what happens next.
Yes, that's my next question, because you mentioned summer 2017, and I know that late in that year, you lost your husband just like after 30 days of the pancreatic cancer diagnosis. And I guess like losing people we love reshapes our identity, our sense of place, sometimes our purposes. And once I spoke to a friend, she lost her mother in Brazil. And she told me, going back to Brazil stopped making sense, because for me, Brazil was my mother's house. And now that's gone. In your case, your husband represented almost 19 years of life together in the U.S. So when he passed, how was it for you to suddenly find yourself in this country without him, now raising a daughter and decided to stay?
Yeah, I still sometimes, there are moments that I say like, can I curse on this podcast?
Yes, go ahead.
What the fuck happened? Like, what the fuck happened to my life? I was angry at first I don't even know, it wasn't at someone in specific, because obviously, how could I blame my husband? This thing hit him, seems to have come out of nowhere. I'm sure he was feeling weird things, pains on his back. And all of a sudden I looked and I said, holy shit, I left my whole life. I rebuilt my entire life here in this country. And for this man, and now all of a sudden he's gone. Like without even us having much of a chance to talk about things. You know how you watch movies and people die slowly and you hold their hands, and it's almost pretty and sort of like angelical, the way they leave so peacefully.
You didn't have anything of that?
No, when death is ugly, death is sad, it's painful, most of all painful for the person who's going. I prayed for my husband to die his last hours. I was like, please God, take him. I cannot see him suffer in this way. My daughter was asleep. She woke up the next day, her father was dead. And I had talked to her about, do you know what a pancreas is? She knew what cancer was, because one of her teachers had breast cancer, but she was fine. She recovered. Daddy has cancer, but in his pancreas, and, he's fighting very hard. I mean, I had to explain all of this to a child. And then, my child woke up and she asked for his daddy. And I said, Daddy is in heaven. She didn't cry, fall on her knees. I didn't cry or fall on my knees. I mean, we were both stunned, My first year as a widow was extremely hard. I'm lucky that I had friends. I mean, I have my family. My mom came, my sister came. My aunt talked to me many times off the edge of the cliff, my godmother, my aunt and godmother. But, on a day-to-day basis, I mostly had myself and my daughter, And we had to figure out how to rebuild this life together. The first year was very hard for me, and she was in a state of shock. And then she fell into a really difficult stage after that. But thankfully, I was feeling a little better. I had a job.
How old was she?
She was 8. Died? She was 8.
Okay.
They were very close. Mike was the mom in many ways, if we want to be stereotypical, because I traveled so much for the Times, and he kind of took over. He was a consultant, so he was mostly, he worked from home. He had a more flexible schedule. He was, in many ways, a better mother than I was. He was more patient to her. I got a call from a friend from Brazil who lost his son when his son was 11 years old. He's a very good friend of mine. And it was the first time that I felt like I really, really cried. Like it came from a place inside of me where I just kept saying to him, why? And he said to me, don't ask yourself why. Ask what for. What's the reason for this? What's the lesson? There's no reason somebody lives and somebody dies, There's no, because I kept saying, these people who don't take care of themselves, these bad people out in the world, mean people, they're out there alive. And my husband was a good man. And he was like, there is no, and he said, well, my son died when he was 11. And I stopped and I was reminded of that. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he said, no, but what has kept me going is thinking, what is the lesson? What do I have to learn from this? And he said, and the greatest thing that you can do is learn about yourself. And I really took that. That was like the thing that really I held on to. and really was transformative for me. And
How long that happened? How long after that happened, that
know,
conversation? Do you remember?
it was months after, not many months after, but things take a while to register. I mean, it was there, it was in my mind, but I just wasn't even ready to interact with it. I just had to get through the motions, wake up in the morning with a smile on my face, get my daughter out of bed, make a breakfast, healthy breakfast for her, put her in the car, drive her to school, then teach. My students, they were young, they knew that I had lost my husband. I was on my first semester of teaching. I didn't finish the semester, somebody else did for me, but I came back in January the following year to teach. And it was great to have that, but also really hard. Every day I had to hold it together and teach a whole class. But I had the most amazing students who really kept me focus on the future, the future of journalism, the influence I could have on them, even talk about what happened to me. I have kept close to many of them, and I think that that's a big part of that. They saw me as a human, a person who is feeling like they do, not a hierarchical relationship. And, my daughter, man, she's just a remarkable kid. I mean, she went through a lot. She has been through a lot. But she's so resilient, and for a long time, I thought it was just something about her, that it was like her thing. She is resilient. She was born resilient. But, then I said, you know what? I have a big role in that. I played a big part in helping her be who she is. And so it's also another way of validating to myself that, I am far from perfect. Anyone who has a partner and has a child knows the many decisions, the many conversations, the sharing of things that happens. Even if it's not fully equal, you have somebody else there. Yeah. Provided that it's a healthy relationship, right? I didn't have, I was the other day thinking, oh, my daughter's going to be going to college in 2 years. Like, how do I make these decisions with her? But then I think of myself, look, you're a girl from Salvador, Bahia, like a small, a state that's not even fully respected in Brazil. It's not Rio, it's not São Paulo. And you made it here, and you've had this career, this amazing life. You've built everything. It's not like there's nothing I can't do, but it's more like, yes, you can do it.
I guess you're just trying to live your life the best you could, considering that your decision to stay in the United States came from him proposing to you, because as you mentioned, you're in love with this man, and you build a life with him here. When he was gone, have you ever considered I cannot be here anymore? Have you ever considered I'm going back to Brazil? And how do you remember when you were no, I'm staying?
Yeah, it was one of the first things I started thinking, maybe I should just pack up and go home. And it was the first time that I thought, really my home, what's the home? Is the place you want to be, right? To me, home is a person, is a group of people, and my home was always Mike, and then Mike and Flora. And it didn't matter if we were in New York, if we were in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, in Arizona, wherever it was, that was home, But that was the moment that I felt number one, Arizona is not my home. Number two, I had lived in New York many years before, so I say it's not my home because I had many, many good friends in New York. And then number two, the home that I have, the place that feels like home is Salvador, is where my parents are. My dad, when he retired, they moved back to my hometown. I was talking to my dad on the phone, and I said to him, I think I want to go back. And of course, my parents were like, if it's what you want to do, it's, we're here, we're going to support you. You really should think long and hard about that. You built a whole career in another country. You have a good life there. Your daughter was born there. I was 44, my husband died, Are you going to start all over again in Brazil at 44 as a journalist? You're going to make, where are you going to work? He started talking sense into me, not in a way of, I knew that if I said, yes, I want to go, they would open their arms and, but it was trying to bring some rationality into a space that was very emotional for me. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to stay. And I won't say that there weren't times when I thought that I made the wrong decision about not going back, but I don't feel that way anymore.
And in one of your tweets, because I went way back.
Wow, I haven't been on Twitter since it became X. So you did your research.
I did my research, girl. But in one of your tweets about losing your husband, you wrote that at that, I don't know what time, but you said, "I will not let his death be my death." Was there like a turning point for you in your grief? I know that things are not like black and white.
Yeah, everything is a process, right? And it's like one thing builds on the next. But I do think that mindset is really important on everything we do. You know, we talked about earlier, like self-confidence, you know, that little voice that tells us that we're not good enough. Nobody is really good enough. A lot of people are faking it out there. And sometimes it's just the way people talk that make us think that they know more. But do they actually know more? And with grief, you know, it's a very individual process. And even within an individual me, there were so many different phases, and it's not linear either. It's not like stage number 1, stage number 2. No, it's like all things at the same time all together. We did a lot of like hiking in Arizona. We lived right by mountains, and there were hiking trails, and I would do these hikes in the summer of Arizona. 3 in the afternoon, it's like 110 degrees outside. It's freaking like hot cooking. You're cooking you as you walk around. And I would go on a hike. And because I really wanted to I wanted to feel something. Of course, I loved my daughter, but even that love was kind of like, it was muffled. It was like there was a lid that came and they put over me, and I smiled to everyone. Everybody thought I was fine, and I would come home and fall apart. You know, people would say, "You're so strong." And I was like, it has nothing to do with strength, okay? It is, you have no choice. What is the other choice? It's to give up. And I'm not going to give up. And it's not even about me. In this case, it's giving up for my daughter. And then I start to think of life in general as a gift, right? I mean, it's every day that I wake up is a gift. You know, and I am a very blessed person. I am healthy, knock on wood. I don't have to struggle to feed myself or feed my child. I have a good network of friends that when I need to talk to someone, I know who to call and who to talk. I surf, so, you know, I love being in the ocean. He died, but we are here. And the best way to say like, fuck you to cancer and to death is to say, you took him, but you did not take me with him. You did not take my daughter with him. I miss Mike, and I also don't miss him in the sense that like I'm at peace with what happened. I regret the fact that he isn't here to see our daughter grow up, you know? And I wonder what kind of person would she have been had she had his influence on her as well? And also, what kind of person would I have been? What would have happened to me and my career, you know, to our lives? I would never know. And like my friend said, you know, what's the lesson here? And the lesson is that I am the one who charts my path, and I just got to do it.
That's beautiful. I just finished a book, and I read a passage on this book. I didn't love this book, but this passage, it made me think about your story as well. So the book is called Intermezzo. I think it's the way you say it because it's an Italian word, written by Sally Rooney. I don't know if you read that. Did you read that book?
I have not read Intermezzo, but I just finished Normal People. I love Sally Rooney. I have not read this one yet.
Okay. So there is this character, a young guy, and he lost his father. And he's talking to his girlfriend about the memories that he has about the father. And he's worried about the memories will fade. And then she tells him, you're never going to forget about him. And then he says that he's afraid that he's forgetting about him because sometimes he can go over an hour without thinking about his dad. To which she says it's normal. And she adds, when someone you love is still alive, you don't think about that person every hour of the day either. And then he finally answers, and that's my favorite part. Yeah, because a living person has their own reality. The person who's gone has no reality anymore, except in thoughts. And once they're gone from thoughts, they actually are completely gone. If I don't think about him, literally, I'm ending his existence. And that was like,
it has very Mexican Day of the Dead undertones, like Coco. I bet she was inspired by the. I wonder if she was
okay,
inspired. The
I have
movie
to watch
Coco,
that
have you ever
movie.
seen? Yeah, it's a beautiful
No.
movie. And it's a tradition, it's a Mexican tradition of the Day of the Dead. The reason Mexicans celebrate the Day of the Dead and it's a festive celebration is because the idea is that you, at least that one day, you need to light candles, celebrate, remember that person, because once you forget that person, that's when the person actually dies. I would love if I were to a book event and she were there, I would ask her that question because I wonder if
Okay.
it came from that.
Yeah, now I want to watch that movie, definitely.
It's a beautiful movie. It's a beautiful movie about death not being the ending, right? That person leaving you here. And I even told my daughter, because she, we had a wake. Mike was a Irish Catholic family, so his parents wanted a wake. I'm not like I was like, when I die, spread my ashes on the most beautiful beach on waves. I just want to be out there and free. That's not who I am. And I told my daughter, that's the box. We come in a box. That's not who your father is. He's not there anymore. I'm very much a believer that things don't start and end the day we are born and the day we die.
In one of your essays, you mentioned the symbolism of your husband's phone number. You keep that active and then you pass that to your daughter. So I guess, could you talk a little bit about this story and the power of these small rituals for your grief process and now the memory?
And I was like revisiting my budget, right? Like all of a sudden it's one person who to carry all the bills, not two. So and it was very clear. One of the things to cut was this second line. So I go to a Verizon store in Phoenix where we lived at the time. I want to disconnect this line. Okay. And we started this conversation and all of a sudden I start crying. All I kept thinking is like, one day I'm going to call that number and it's going to be like some dude with in the Bronx. That's what I kept thinking. It's going to be some guy in the Bronx who's going to pick up the phone and it's going to be, yo. And I'm going to be like, you are not my husband. Why are you using his number? Right. And once that number is gone, it's gone. You never recover it ever. I didn't want to spend the money to just keep a line active. And he said, you can pay $5 a month just to keep the number active under your name, the number under your name, but you don't have to connect the line. So whenever you're ready, you can do whatever you want with it. And so immediately that was, my daughter was 8. I said, well, whenever my daughter's ready for a cell phone, I will give her father's number. And it was 3 years that I paid those $5 a month to keep the number. But it made me feel really good about not having a dude from the Bronx answer the phone saying, yo, I just made that up in my head. But also the idea of keeping a piece of him to her. She knows it was his number. But it's not something that we go like, oh my gosh, it was daddy's number. It's just normal. Oh, it used to be daddy's number. This was one thing that was really significant to me because it's such a personal thing because we carry our numbers for so long, right? My number, it's the same cell phone number that I've had since 2002 when I got my cell phone number in New York, when I first moved to New York. So, but I don't have little rituals. What I have had and still have is conversations with him, I used to call his name and then somebody told me, don't do that, let his spirit rest in peace. And I said, oh, okay, when I needed help. But I talked to Mike, I will tell him about Flora, send me some clarity, let me have some peace of mind to make this decision. Let me believe in myself, believe that I can make this decision alone. Because he was my biggest champion. Mike believed in me before anybody else believed in myself. When we met within a few months, he said, one day you're going to work at the New York Times. Long before I do. Wow. And he never got to work at the Times. And I was like, you're crazy. And he's like, you are so talented. And it's not to say that the talent isn't clear, but I think it takes a certain kind of special kind of person. I had a great recruiter at the Times Nancy Sharkey, who I'm still very, very grateful for, to see beyond all the things, all the moving of the hands, all the like loud, the bright red lipstick and the like loudness that's just loudness because that's who you are, not because you're screaming. All these cultural things that in Brazil are so common and that are so much a part of who I am, even though I've now been here more years than I lived in Brazil. I was 25 and I left. I've been here for 27. It takes a special person to see that. And Mike, a small town guy from a blue collar family in central Massachusetts, saw it so clearly and so quickly to the point that he was able to show it to myself. So, those are the kind of conversations I have with him.
It's so nice. Since we're talking about love, I know that eventually you open yourself up to the possibility of a new love. I have another question. Have you watched that show on Netflix called From Scratch with
No.
Zoe Saldana? It's strong. I don't know if you know what it's about, but it's based on a memoir by Tamby Locke. Her husband died from a rare soft tissue cancer, and eventually she got married again. And when the show premiered, during an interview like this, I think it was like Good Morning America, some of these shows, she was asked about her current husband, how he felt about her love story. That now was was public through the book, but with the Netflix show was even more. And she said, and I quote, "To repartner with someone after loss means to own all of who they are, and that includes their past. And my love for my late husband does not diminish because I love my husband, my husband now, her new husband. And the heart can hold both. Adequate heart gets bigger." What do you think about this? Do you agree?
I agree 100%. I think that, any second relationship right after a marriage, whether it's after a divorce or a loss, which divorce has its own kind of grief too, right? And if you start dating someone or marry someone who is divorced and with the person he used to be married, they had children, you can't think that you're just marrying this guy in the case of a woman who's cisgender and, like heterosexual, whatever. Like, you can't expect to marry this person without marrying the children and to a certain extent the ex, whether it's someone you will have a relationship with or not, but that person will still figure in your life, in your partner's life. When somebody dies, it's different because especially, people die of disease so quickly, like Mike did, for example. Nobody wanted him to die, of course. Nobody expected him to die so young. I certainly didn't. He was 46. And I loved him and love him deeply. It's the love that created our family, created my relationship with my daughter. I have written similar things that the heart's so elastic, it's such a wonderful place to be as a human being, to know that that I have loved and then I can love again. And it's it's not even like, oh, I love more or less, or it's just love. It's
not a competition, right?
No, never will be. And it shouldn't be. And nor should I ever compare, nor do I ever compare, that one person was a part of my past. And this person is a part of my present. So I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of the story that, yes, I met someone. I met John in 2003. So 6 years after Mike died, I had resigned myself to okay, I'm just going to have fun. I want to meet a guy. I had a very toxic relationship with one person before. And it was just a wrong person, wrong relationship, but I learned a lot about it. One of the main thing I learned was I don't want to be with anybody else. I'm happy on my own. I want to just meet someone and have fun, go out, have fun. I didn't want to be hurt again,
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I think my heart cannot take is hurt. And because it brings everything back. Brings the losing. I think the best way to explain it, or the easiest, is when you lose someone, I think love becomes more intense because you understand what it means to lose. So you don't want to, like, I don't want to waste my time with little things, with arguing about stupid shit, with worrying about material things, with pretending or not talking about the things that need to be talked about, hiding or, masking things. This is not how I want to live. The way I met John was interesting because I went to Costa Rica in the summer of 2023 to learn how to surf. And he and I shared a van to the hotel. He's a surfer. He's surfed for a long time, and he was there also by himself to surf for a week. And I was by myself to learn to surf. And we, talked and had dinner. And then all of a sudden I found myself completely in love with another person without even wanting to, And that's the funny thing is that, like, just like my first love, Mike was not planned. I met him at a job. Like, he interviewed me for a job, right?
Yeah.
This one wasn't either, but I'm really happy that it
Yeah.
happened.
You were there saying, like, I don't want anyone else. I just want to have fun. And life said, hold my beer.
Exactly. That's so great. Exactly. Like, yeah, no, not the plans we have for you.
My last question for you. If you had one message for all the immigrant women listen to us, or maybe women that are not immigrating as well, that are navigating life, career, love abroad, perhaps I know there are a lot of moms as well, sometimes like single moms. What would be your advice?
Don't ever let anybody define you. Don't let all these labels you said, if we have immigrants, it's almost like they're separate groups, right? Or single moms, or people who lost, widows, or this. We can be I am a bunch of ands, we are all a lot of ands. I am an immigrant and an American and a widow and a mother, and I'm in love, and I'm a professor, and I'm a journalist. I am so many things, which is all the collection of these things is what makes me who I am, rather than be so attached to, oh, I'm an immigrant, therefore in this country, a woman immigrant, therefore in this country, the opportunities for me are fewer. Factually speaking, yes. If that's the inner conversation you're having, it's never going to help you advance. So it's more about, yes, and what am I going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Like, there comes a point that you have to just keep going. And a lot of times we limit ourselves because we get too attached by the way other people define us. And we think that we have to live by their expectations. The greatest expectations we have to live by are those set by us. And mine, for example, are to accept the days that I'm not entirely great at what I do, or the days that I wake up in a bad mood, or the days that, I had one plan and things turned out differently, or the days that I actually do things really awesomely. That's one of the reasons I love surfing, because I feel like it's a constant reminder that it does not matter. You may surf an awesome wave. Pop up, you're surfing, you're like, oh my gosh, I got this. And then you come back and the next wave, you wipe out, you're underwater, out of breath. And you were thinking, wow, I just thought I had finally gotten this and I knew how to do this thing. And here's the ocean, nature telling you, like, you're never going to be perfect. So just embrace it. John, who he surfs and we've talked about it, like when you wipe out, go like a rag doll under the ocean. Just let the wave shake you. And it's like, sometimes you just have to let life shake you. And then ask yourself, and now what are you going to do about it? Are you going to paddle back in, surf another wave, or are you just going to head back and it's fine if you want to head back to the sand and just suntan. It's also good.
That's amazing. I love it. So before we finish, can you please let people know where they can find you? And also, I don't know if you have an answer for this question, but when can we expect your memoir? I can't wait to read that.
The memoir is ready. However, I am not happy with it. I've sat on it now for about a year, went on some tangents that I didn't need to go. So I want to revisit that. And I don't know when that's going to be, but it will be at some point. But it's, there's a book. It's apparently pretty good, but it's not the book that I want to write, I think in part because it dwells too much on the sadness, and I am just in a different space now.
Okay.
So I continue to be at work on a memoir. Where can people find me? But I guess a great way to stay in touch is through my Substack, because it gives you a chance to interact with me, and email me, and Instagram, which is also open. So
I'll make sure to include that in the description of the podcast. But I just want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was an amazing conversation. It was really, really good. And I hope this can inspire a lot of people that are listening to us.
Oh, it was so much fun. I loved talking to you too.
So please send your message to me and to Fernanda, your comments about the podcast, and we will talk again soon. Bye. Bye. I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Fernanda. I had such a great time with her, and I also had such a great time editing our conversation and being able to listen to her answers and her reflections again. It was just like amazing and really, really inspiring. So make sure to check her links. I'm gonna put everything in the description below. And please make sure to subscribe to our channel if you're watching this on YouTube, and follow us on Spotify and give us 5 stars there as well. Every single little step helps us to spread the word about the show and spread the word about these amazing stories. And please don't forget that if you are a woman with an amazing story living abroad, or if you know a woman living abroad that has an amazing story, please get in contact with me. I'm always looking for new stories. And other than that, again, thank you so much for being here. And until next time, bye.